Hi everyone, it's me, Arielle, and it's Wednesday Warriors, and this week I'm going to be talking about relapse, slip-ups, setbacks, and things of that nature. I'm going to be talking about the difference between those things and how you can determine if you are relapsing so that you can better prevent them and better get help for them. I did a video a few years back about the difference between a relapse and a slip-up. So if you want to check that video out, feel free, but I will touch on a couple of things in this video as well. Basically, the number one thing that I want to get across to you before you even start watching this video is that anytime you have some kind of a setback or some kind of a problem or issue during recovery, it's to be expected. It doesn't automatically mean that you are at the beginning of a relapse. It doesn't mean that you are in danger of relapsing necessarily. It's often just part of the process. Sometimes a relapse is even part of the process of recovery, and sometimes multiple relapses will happen before recovery really sticks and holds and becomes a new way of life for you. I think what happens so often is people have some kind of what they consider a failure in the midst of their recovery, and they automatically want to scratch all of the great progress that they've done so far. And any kind of a mistake that you might make during recovery doesn't automatically erase all of the good work that you've done and all of the efforts that you've made up until that point. It doesn't erase, it doesn't give you a clean slate where you're starting recovery again from the beginning. Sometimes a mistake that you might make will mean that you have to pay closer attention to yourself or closer attention to some of the things that are going on in your life so that you can prevent a relapse, but it doesn't mean that you're automatically relapsing just because one isolated incident occurred. I've talked about slip-ups in the past, and I've talked about bad days being inevitable. You can pull through them. They're going to be part of the process, and hopefully the more you stick with recovery, the more the good days will outweigh the bad days. It'll start to happen, and before you know it, the bad days will be very few and far between. And that's just the way it's supposed to work, so don't be so hard on yourself. And you don't want to let the fear of relapsing make you relapse. You don't want to be afraid that your eating disorder will take over your life again, so much so that it does, that you let it happen because you're so focused on the fear instead of the goal, which is a life of freedom. We're all human, and one setback doesn't negate all the hard work that you've put forth into recovery. It doesn't negate all the hard work that you've done up until that point when you have a slip-up. You aren't starting at square one again just because you had a setback. And the analogy that I use a lot is about a point A and a point B. I say, think of it this way. If you want to get from California to New York and you drive 1,000 miles, then stop your car and therefore stop making progress, you don't have to start back at California to get on your way to New York again. You're still 1,000 miles of the way there. You might have stopped, and therefore your trip will take more time, but you don't have to start over. You just get back in the car and you keep going, and you'll get there eventually. And you can stop as many times as you want. Now, I don't say that to encourage slip-ups or setbacks or whatever you want to call them, but you really have to put more faith in yourself than in your eating disorder, which again is something I say all the time, but I completely stand by. You got to drive that car. In order to be able to prevent any kinds of setbacks or slip-ups from becoming full-blown relapses, you want to just be aware of what your triggers are, what your pressures are, what your stressors are. And when you have any of these pressures or stressors present in your life, you want to give yourself that extra little bit of self-care. And the more aware you are that something in your life is going to be more of a stress at a certain point, the better equipped you will be to recognize when behaviors start to crop up that might be indicative of a relapse beginning. You also want to watch out for transitions or big events, things like a breakup or a death or a move or something going on with your school or your job could be something to look out for. And maybe nothing will happen. Maybe you'll stay strong with recovery and everything will be great and your healthy coping mechanisms will see you through. But it's always good to be a little bit kinder to yourself during those hard times, and to just be hyper vigilant about being aware of what's going on inside of you and outside of you, so that you can nip any kind of a setback in the bud. Sometimes if you surround yourself with other people who also have eating disorders, I don't want to say that you'll be more prone to relapse, but you'll certainly have more things around you that will be apt to pull you back down an eating disorder path. It's the same maybe with people in your life who are dieting or who are really focused on weight or appearance or things like that, and they don't necessarily have to have an eating disorder. But when those things are a big focus in our lives, it can be very hard to stay on the straight and narrow. It's sort of like being addicted to something like alcohol and having someone sit right next to you every single night and drink several drinks right in your face. It doesn't mean that it's going to cause you to relapse, but it's going to be a little bit harder for you not to if you're not in a very solid place yet. Sometimes when you are in treatment or in therapy or even doing recovery work on your own, some of the stuff that you've been holding inside or been working through can bubble to the top. If you've had a trauma, if you've had a large event, if you are dealing with the root of your eating disorder, maybe delving into past memories, delving into your history a little bit, doing a lot of really hard emotional work, sometimes psychologically it can be a lot. And even if you have made it very far in recovery, when all that stuff bubbles to the top, it can cause you to relapse. And if you know that that's a possibility from the beginning, you're in an excellent place to be able to stop it from happening. I'm going to lay it out for you in clear terms. If you're dealing with any of the trauma stuff, if you are being triggered by things, if something bad happens or you have one of those events like a breakup or just a stressful day at school or work or whatever it might be, if anything going on in your life causes you to have a bad day with your eating disorder, or even a bad week with your eating disorder or behaviors or anything like that, and you don't let that bad day or those bad days continue, it's not a relapse, it's a slip-up. If things are hard, you make mistakes, but then you bounce back and you continue on that recovery path, you've had some setbacks, but you haven't relapsed. When you begin to give into those bad days or those bad behaviors or those bad coping mechanisms, and they become part of your routine and they become your new path, and you don't stop after a certain amount of time, then you're relapsing. And you have essentially chosen a non-recovery path. Not saying that an eating disorder is a choice. It's certainly a mental disorder. And I'm actually not saying that you've chosen relapse, but relapse can happen. It can sneak up on us. But you have not continued to choose recovery. So the other stuff has been allowed to happen and has maybe happened without you knowing it, and then suddenly you're in the midst of it. But when you can recognize that that has happened or is happening, you can still take steps to get yourself back on track. In a past video, I used the example of a job promotion. And it was a very simple example to use because I think that it's pretty clear. If you were up for a job promotion and you really thought that you were going to get it, and you worked really hard to get it, and you didn't get it, and you are completely bummed out, really upset, really sad, really disappointed. So you, all of a sudden, without even thinking hardly, you go back to that place of saying, well, I feel terrible. I'm not going to eat for the rest of the night. That's just your go-to. Then you go home and you don't eat, and the next day you wake up and you're feeling really depressed and you don't eat. But then the next morning you wake up and you think, this isn't what I want to be doing. I'm so upset that I didn't get that job promotion, but I can't believe that I'm going to jeopardize all of the work that I've done and continue this path. Then you start eating and you pick up where you left off, even though you're sad, and even though you didn't do good things for a couple of days. You're not relapsing. You've taken your power back. You've thought it through. You've had the chance to see if that's what you really want to do, and you haven't done it. So you have had some setbacks, definitely, and you might have recognized something that set you off, like being upset about something or being disappointed in yourself or being angry at somebody who didn't see your good qualities. But you haven't punished yourself and taken it out on yourself and used self-destructive behaviors on a continuous basis. You started to, but you stopped. I'm going to use an example with different behaviors because I know eating disorders have all different faces. There are many different kinds of eating disorders and there are different behaviors associated with them. And I think this example will be good for different kinds of people. If you are struggling with bulimia and you used to binge and purge and you've been getting a handle on that, and we'll use the same example of this job promotion. If you didn't get the job promotion and you're extremely sad and depressed and disappointed, so you go home and you binge and you purge that night, and the next day you are extremely upset that you binged and purged because you had been behavior free for 3 months. It doesn't mean that you're having a relapse if you pick up the next day and decide that that was something you didn't want to do and you want to continue recovery. Was it a mistake? Sure. And was it good for your body? No. But you're not relapsing because you're not continuing. You're not letting it continue to happen. Eating disorders are very tricky in that way. They're not able to be used in the same way as an addiction with drugs or an addiction with alcohol, where you're clean and sober for a certain amount of time and then you have one drink or you use drugs again and then you are no longer clean and sober. It's a similar concept, but it doesn't constitute a relapse, if that makes sense. Just because you have resorted to behaviors, as long as you've picked yourself back up and you continue in recovery and you haven't spiraled down to continue using those bad, unhealthy coping mechanisms, you haven't set yourself up for a relapse. You've had a setback and you're just going to get back up, just like with that point A to point B. You were in California, you did excellent, you didn't binge and purge, and then all of a sudden something terrible happened, you resorted to your bad coping mechanisms in Illinois, and you stopped. And when you realize that you don't want to keep binging and purging, and you want to continue with recovery, you're going to get up and keep going. You're going to keep driving that car. You aren't going to have to turn around and drive back to California to start for New York again. So try to keep that analogy in your mind because I think it keeps us going. It keeps us seeing that goal and it keeps us remembering all the hard work that we've put forth. A slip-up isn't a failure. A setback isn't a failure. And even if you do relapse, or you are relapsing, it's not a failure. It's a relapse. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in another video. I hope you all have a great week. I will see you next time.